Hello, I'm Jana Weiss with the Kentucky Council on Post-Secondary Education. I'm pleased to welcome you to this conversation with Alan Gutierrez. Alan Gutierrez is an accreditation specialist at the University of Louisville. Prior to focusing on accreditation, Alan was the Director of Institutional Effectiveness at an institution in Texas. While there, he created and provided the training, resources, and technical support to implement modern and effective planning and assessment practices. He understands the challenges that higher education faces, and he is here to share how institutions can demonstrate continuous improvement of each academic program while adding value to college degrees. Our topic today is curriculum mapping. Alan, across Kentucky and all 24 public post-secondary institutions, faculty, staff, and administrators are working to incorporate 10 essential skills into their curriculum. We call this effort the Kentucky Graduate Profile. Our goal is to ensure that every Kentucky college graduate has a relevant, high-quality education and is prepared with the essential skills needed for life and on the job. We're glad you're with us this morning, and we believe that to accomplish that goal, faculty need to map out their curriculum in every program. So we'll begin with this question. Please share with us what curriculum mapping involves. Why is it important?
So, curriculum mapping first is just simply a method for understanding the relationships that exist between a degree program's program learning outcomes and their required courses. And so, this involves one, significant time and faculty collaboration. More specifically, what the process allows for is for faculty to really think through the pedagogical lens through which instruction is going to be provided. At what point are we introducing, or at what point do we stop introducing concepts and shift more into reinforcement of these concepts? And at what point are students expected to demonstrate mastery with a very, very high degree of confidence, both by the faculty and their students? So for me, it really comes down to understanding your program in ways in which that you may have not understood it before. And it's really the starting point of what we refer to as assurance of learning. Now, with regard to its importance, historically speaking, if you're familiar with the phrase, the sage on the stage, this was more like the instructional approach in all of higher education for decades. Professors stood in front of the room and waxed eloquently on their life's research, and rightfully so. One could say that this was more the artistic approach to curriculum and instruction. I'm old enough to remember several of my professors stating that it was their job to teach, and it was my sole responsibility to ensure that I learned something. But all of that changed in around 2005. So in the early 2000s, accreditors were starting to signal the need to engage in what educators with an education in education have always known, that there are principles, there are tenets of curriculum planning, mapping, design, and we needed to see a shift within higher education institutions. We know a thing or two about how humans learn, whether that's a pedagogical approach or an andragogical approach, essentially how K through 12 students learn, that would be Bloom's taxonomy, or how adult learners learn, and that's getting more to Fink's taxonomy. And so there was a call by the accreditors to say, we don't want to lose this art of teaching, but we definitely need to show far more intentionality. And again, I go back to this assurance of learning, continuous improvement. And so that was the big move. I think the other importance, as I mentioned earlier, is collaboration. The process facilitates dialogue amongst faculty to ask the question, do we agree on the scope and the sequence of this particular credential? And if we don't, we really need to talk that through, because we do need one degree within this particular level in this discipline, and we need to really think through why we have our differences. Do we agree with where introduction, reinforcement, and mastery is taking place? Do we understand the lane that we're traveling in our individual and collective responsibility, not just to ourselves, but to our students? And this is also a really good way to orient new faculty, adjunct faculty, into how our department's curriculum is structured and the very specific instructional needs that we need. And I think the last thing I would just say, there's a lot of people currently today that are questioning the value of a higher education degree. And I think it would serve institutions and departments, units very, very well to go back to what we know, and that's assessment plans, curriculum mapping, to both not just demonstrate continuous improvement, but defend the value of a degree in higher education.
That's great. Thank you, Alan. And that leads us to digging down into these essential skills. So as Kentucky educators work to embed the 10 essential skills, sometimes called professional or durable transferable skills, into every college program, why is curriculum mapping particularly important to this effort?
I think it goes back to just intentionality, which I think I've already mentioned. But when you think about a entering cohort of students, they're coming in and maybe the institution is engaging in assessment of these general education competencies or the 10 essential skills to establish some sort of baseline benchmark for this cohort. And at the end of year 2, they'll conduct another assessment just to see and ensure that these students have developed a solid foundation, the liberal arts component of their degree, in preparation for their major. And then it's at this point that everything shifts from those 10 essential skills to the actual discipline-specific knowledge, skills, and dispositions. And again, that's always been the model, and that's fine. And at the end of year 4, obviously the department's engaging in their assessment processes for their major, their discipline, and maybe the institution engages in assessment of the 10 essential skills in year 4. But my experience and what I've seen is that tends to just be whatever scores are produced are just happenstance because of that shift that occurs. And so I think by mapping the curriculum both at the discipline specific level, but also with the 10 essential skills in mind, we can create learning activities aligned to the course learning outcomes without losing sight of these 10 essential skills. And research continues to demonstrate that more so today than before, employers are seeing the need to have these 10 essential skills developed in our undergraduate population.
You have mentioned in curriculum mapping about continuous improvement. So how do you see curriculum maps as living documents that drive continuous improvement rather than just being a one-time compliance exercise?
Yes. So this is a very, I see this all the time. And when I'm working with faculty, I will just simply ask the question, what is a map in its simplest form? And the answer to that question is it's a tool. And so if it is a tool, we need to make sure that we're using the very tool that we just developed. Imagine, someone inventing the hammer and it never being used to actually hammer a nail. I think about cartographers mapping these large bodies of land, these bodies of water, but then leave their maps on a shelf or filed away in a file folder somewhere right before embarking on a multi-year journey. I mean, it's absolutely absurd. So I think one practical way that one could use their curriculum maps is to actually cross-reference their syllabi. Is what you are saying occurring in what you have mapped out, is it actually working its way down into the course? And in my previous institution, when I started engaging in this, I noticed that one course was aligned to program learning outcome 4. But when I looked at all the course learning outcomes, I just could see that there was no way there was a relation, it was missing. There was no direct alignment between those two things. So that's one way. It's always about ensuring that what you say up here actually works its way down into the course. And this is very, very important because this talks about assessment congruency. Essentially, that your course learning outcomes align to your PLOs directly, not indirectly, there's not an inference, there's a direct alignment. Your learning activities align to those course learning outcomes, and that you're selecting the appropriate assessments. Because if there is no congruency between any of that, when you do engage in assessment, you cannot have confidence in the scores. And that brings us to this assurance of learning. There's going to be doubt with the reliability and the validity of your assessment scores.
We really appreciate what you shared, and we look forward to a future webinar that tells us even more about curriculum mapping. And for those who want to dive in and get going with curriculum mapping, they can go to CPE's website and look at the Graduate Profile Resource Center. So thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time, your suggestions, and your advice this morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.